Today's lecture will be on Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, and this short story can be found in your Broadview Anthology of Short Fiction, or you could find a copy of it online. So I'll just talk briefly about Kate Chopin. Kate Chopin was an American author best known for her short stories and novels. Like many female authors who were writing during this early period, her work wasn't really acknowledged or valued at the time that she was alive. It wasn't until much later, the 1950s, 1960s, her work was rediscovered by scholars and celebrated as a valuable contribution to feminist writing, women's writing of the 20th century. Kate Chopin, so in this regard, she was ahead of her time in her depiction of women's lives and their inner feelings. And her work was often viewed as controversial, and she was criticized for her depiction of women. So her life was quite dramatic itself. So she was born in St. Louis, in Louisiana, and she followed a very conventional path as a young woman. So she married at the age of 20 and then became a mother. So she had 6 children in total. And it wasn't until 1882 when her life changed quite dramatically. So her husband died and left her very destitute. And at this point, she had to move in with her mother, and this was the only way she was able to support her family. But unfortunately, her mother died the following year, leaving Kate Chopin with 6 children to take care of. And this is when she took on the role as a writer. So she entered the writing industry and was able to make a living for herself and support her children and family this way. But like I said, her work was often criticized and controversial. Her best known short story is the one we're doing today, The Story of an Hour, which was published in 1894. And in this story, she depicts a wife who, again, reacts in a surprising way than what would be considered conventional or proper for a woman of this time period. And in this regard, she was, again, ahead of her time in her depiction of women and an overtly sort of feminist message of her work. So if we look more closely at the historical context in which Kate Chopin was writing, we get a little bit more insight about how her writing fits in with the first wave of feminism. And I've dated this time 1848 to 1920 as being considered the first wave. So during this late 19th century, there was a lot of social change taking place, particularly in the lives of women. What we call the first wave of feminism was gaining popularity, and it focused specifically on gaining women's suffrage or the right to vote. So part of what the first wave feminists were reacting to was the social and political oppression that they felt within a patriarchal or male-dominated society. Many women felt constrained or oppressed by traditional or idealized feminine roles. And the one that I want to focus on today is this ideal of the housewife, the Victorian housewife, as the angel in the house. So this phrase, again, was used to refer to an ideal type of woman. And the angel in the house was a very devoted, submissive woman. So she would do whatever her husband would sort of ask of her, and was very sort of self-sacrificing, passive, powerless, meek, and again, sort of innocent or pure. So this ideal of how women were supposed to be was rejected by many first-wave feminists, and they felt it was really constraining their actual dreams and desires for their lives. And so part of what Kate Chopin is doing is, again, writing against or rebelling against some of these ideals of feminine virtue as being self-sacrificing. So one of the ways that we can look at a story when we have a short story is to diagram it or look at it from the perspective or model of Freytag's pyramid. And this is included in your key terms of fiction handout. So just a brief review. Freytag's pyramid is again a representation of the plot structure. And we have 5 parts to it. So the exposition, this is where in this short story you're provided with the basic information of the story. So who the main characters are, where the story is set, and sort of all that basic information. Who, what, when, where, why are answered. And during the exposition we also have a complicating factor, which again would occur, and again it creates a problem or conflict in what would otherwise be a stable situation. So this complication can be an external event, such as a train accident, or it could be a circumstance that befalls the character, or an internal conflict that troubles the protagonist. So whatever it is that occurs that complicates these sort of stable lives of the characters, and that begins the rising action. So rising action is again building tension, escalation of feelings, anything that sort of is building to or adding to the dramatic effect of the story. And then we reach the moment of crisis or climax. Also, it could be referred to as a turning point. But this is the moment of greatest tension in the story. It's the most exciting or most important point of the narrative. So after this moment of crisis or turning point, we have falling action, and this is where the tension of the story is released. Threads are being sort of tied up together, and we just get to see the fallout of everything that just occurred. And then finally there is the denouement, or resolution, conclusion, whatever you want to call it. And this is the final part of the story where everything is tied together and some sort of stability is restored. It might not be the same as it was before, but there's a new sort of equilibrium or stability created at the end. And again, our author might tie up things nicely in a closed ending, or he might leave them open, as in an open ending. So I have uploaded some templates that you can use of Freytag's pyramid, and I'd like you to again use them as a way of charting out your understanding of the plot structure of Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour. So you can do that and again get some participation marks for filling out the form. Okay, so we begin the story, and almost immediately the complicating factor is revealed when Mrs. Mallard hears the news that her husband has died. So 2 people break the news to her, Josephine and Richards. So they report to her in a very sort of gentle way, breaking the news to Mrs. Mallard that her husband has died. And it's also revealed that she is afflicted with heart trouble, and this is why they have to break the news to her so gently. And then her immediate reaction is to weep. Almost immediately she starts crying. So she wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. And then almost right after that she retreats to her private room, and there's no one in that room except for her. And it's here she sits down in front of this open window in her comfortable armchair, and then looks out the window and begins sort of dreaming of the possibilities of how her life might unfold following this very surprising news of her husband's death. So we get some insight into what Mrs. Mallard's true feelings are in regards to the news of her husband's death. And it's a sort of gradual building of feeling that she experiences when she's alone in this room. So on page 53 you can follow along in your book. So this is the 3rd paragraph down. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name, but she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching towards her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white, slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over, under her breath, free, free, free. So again, in this moment, we get a little bit more insight into how she was really feeling following the news of her husband's death. And while it is sort of building gradually, this feeling comes over her, and finally she says those three words, free, free, free. So we gain a little bit of insight into the fact that she is actually happy, and in a way claiming her freedom in this moment of her husband's death. So in this story, we can also identify a couple of different literary devices, including the one that I want to talk about right now, which is irony. And irony in the story is again defined on multiple levels, actually. There's three different types of irony in the story: verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. So again, we can understand this as being sort of two levels to the narrative. So on one level, we have verbal irony, where a writer or one of the characters says one thing, but really there's something else implied in those words. Situational irony occurs when what we expect is going to happen is the opposite of what actually occurs. And then the final one is dramatic irony, where the audience, so we the readers, know something that the other characters do not. So we're going to look more specifically at this story and identify how these three types of irony are present. So the most important type of irony in this story is dramatic irony. As Mrs. Mallard, Louise Mallard, is alone in her room, only we, the readers, get insight into how she was truly feeling about her husband's death. And then we learn that she was actually, these newfound freedom that she experiences is again something that makes her excited and happy for life, whereas before, when her husband was alive, she was depressed and hoping that life would be short. So if you look on the bottom of page 53, we get a little bit more insight into why she feels invigorated and renewed in terms of her new life now that her husband has died. So she said, she did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond the bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. There would be no one to live for during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in the blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. And yet she had loved him sometimes, often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in face of this possession of self-assertion when she suddenly realized as the strongest impulse of her being? Free, body and soul, free, she kept whispering. Given the fact that we have more insight into Louise Mallard than the other characters, we will interpret her death differently than how they interpret it. So Josephine, Richards, and the doctor all believe that the moment when her husband returns happy and healthy from work, walking through the door as if nothing happened at all, they believe that it's the shock of seeing him alive and the overwhelming feeling of joy that she experiences in that moment, that event that actually inevitably sort of causes her heart to give out and kills her on the spot. But the readers, because we know what was going on inside of her head, we know that she is actually sort of heartbroken